to acclimate to a team's culture and to acclimate to being a part of a football team that already had a personality prior to their arrival. It's kind of where a team gets its personality, is in the spring and the summer. It's a lot of hard work, especially if you're just trying to make a spot for yourself. But this year there have been no excuses. Every school's had pretty much a reasonable spring. Most of them has wrapped up their spring practices and getting ready for a spring ball game, maybe. Where you show the fans what you got. Kind of a dress rehearsal of sorts. And then you get the whole summer to try to pretty much work with who you're going to work with. This is kind of like the spring kind of pretty much culls the ones that's not going to be helpful, to be honest with you. The spring is where he tries to figure out what he can sift the wheat from the chaff. And the summer, they work with the wheat. And so if you're still whittling wheat from chaff in June, it's going to probably be a long football season for your fans anyway. But teams like Alabama, Georgia, Clemson, Ohio State, set teams, even though today's world, that's a strange way to put it. But it's essentially still established football teams that aren't looking to change a whole lot just on account of the spring. But when they have a new quarterback or a lot of new positions to be filled, it's perpetually that way in college football now, even amongst the traditional powers. That's an unfortunate circumstance, and the transfer portal has not exactly helped that matter. Now, if college football doesn't want to become in the class of college basketball, which is in their peak of their season now, they're starting their March Madness, have gotten into it already, and nobody I talk to even is slightly amused by the matter. It is of no interest, and that began with the one and done football players, basketball players coming in, playing a year, and going pro, and that became allowable standard, and it essentially has destroyed the sport. Now the transfer portal is the same thing. Football teams need to be together a little while. They just play better when there's a little continuity. Continuity might be the most precious commodity of all, if it's good continuity. Reminds me of a Vanderbilt coach one time who was talking to the press and was raving about the fact that he was returning 10 starters on offense. And that was the good news for Vanderbilt. Then the reporter asked him, what was the bad news? He goes, well, we're returning 12 starters on offense. And so that finished 153rd in the country, most likely. But when you return star power, and lots of it, like Bama and Georgia and Ohio State and Clemson, you know you're going to win football games. That's not really your concern. It's winning 5 or 6 games is not anybody's contemplation. They're just trying to be the national champion, playing a different league, playing a different kind of sport altogether. Like I said, there's one of them teams in the SEC East, and that's Georgia. And there hadn't been another one that's thinking that way or acting that way for the last 10, 12 years. Had a reasonable chance. Florida was the last one that took a swig at championship caliber, and it lasted as long as the championship caliber coach was there. Or at least that's how the story goes. So Georgia's enjoying a window of championship caliber expectations, and the fans should rejoice in it, not be beleaguered by it. It's a wonderful opportunity. And these things do come in cycles, even amongst the best. But Georgia's in the middle of a good, long cycle in their favor. They need to take advantage of every one of them moments and get as many acclimates and championship rings as possible on account of they can. They need to do what they can do. In Georgia football, it's always been about maximizing your potential. Doing more with less was Vince Dooley kind of football. Now, Georgia gets accused of doing less with more. So the conclusion is Georgia does have more. They have more to bargain with in the East than most of their SEC East rivals. And so we spent a little time discussing that only for the purpose of saying it wasn't really worth discussing, in the sense that Georgia shouldn't have an Eastern Division battle ever. And most likely they won't. So let's get back to what really matters here. Spring. Georgia didn't have a spring to figure a lot of stuff out that they should have figured out. We'll give them that excuse. This year, there won't be no excuses. If that field, if that team Georgia puts on the field doesn't do what they're supposed to do, there'll be some changes eventually. But Georgia's in a position, and have been, thinking like those at the top for the last 4 or 5 years, since Kirby Smart came over, and Mark Richt tried sometimes to put Georgia in that upper echelon. But you can tell it wasn't in Mark Richt's heartfelt desire to be in the upper echelon, as the middle was where they was. A little too easygoing in my book. Kirby Smart's got the drive. Georgia's reinvigorated with national championship fervor. And so obviously, if they have to win a national title, they got to win the East. Their first opponent is Clemson, which the logical discussion will bring the topic to Clemson. And that's what we'll be discussing in episodes to come. For a little while, we'll discuss Clemson because Georgia's got a game with them, so that makes it topical. Plus, Clemson is in Georgia's backyard. They're 100 miles away, less than that. As a campus that has a national title football operation, and Georgia's trying to establish their territory as well, and they're needing some championship rings to keep up with the Joneses. Excellent opportunity to have that happen by playing Clemson. It should be an event that the Georgia fans should invigorate the city of Charlotte like they did at Notre Dame and win the football game, and it could be just a marvelous season for Georgia. And so Clemson is certainly a reasonable discussion. So we don't really hear much about them on this side of the media. I don't. In Alabama and Clemson and Ohio State, they don't really have people prying into their affairs because that's the beauty of winning. People leave you alone, but they don't seem to have any issues. They stay out of the news if they can in that way. All you hear from them is they're signing top recruits all the time. Good news. Now, so Clemson, there's some little dirt to be dug up there, and we're going to start digging. Because Clemson kind of gets a pass in too many ways, but there's a little bit of dirty laundry down there, and we're going to talk about that when we come back. We may broach the subject before we break on a break, but Clemson has some cracks in the armor. Some of it is just natural. Most of it will get fixed because they got a constant repair crew coming in. They're like a airplane, a Delta airliner. They get the maintenance, but there's something, even the top operators sometimes get slack, lackadaisical, and that's when you have problems. And there's a big one, a big juicy one, that no one's talking about at Clemson. But old Beauregard, General Beauregard's going to tell you all about it when we come back from Bulldog banter, and see.